Hello again. The Practical Animal channel is dedicated to the public understanding of conservation, aiming to give students the career hacks that may just give you the edge you need to get that dream animal job. To meet today's guest, we go to Africa. Botha is a conservation thinker talking today about the African vulture crisis. African vultures, just like their Asian counterparts, have undergone a catastrophic decline over the past 30 years. The Red Data Book lists African vultures as either endangered or critically endangered, and we desperately need quantifiable data on the ecosystem services they provide. According to scientists, Old World vultures first appeared in the fossil record at least 30 million years ago. Working with vultures, living the wildlife, looks like this.
Andre, you work with vultures. What does your job involve, please?
Well, I manage the Vultures for Africa program for the Endangered Wildlife Trust. I've been in the employ for 19 years, going on 20. Initially sort of working on a wider spectrum of large bird species that included raptors and vultures. But since 2016, my entire focus has really been on vultures and vulture conservation. Of course, I've been involved in that for much longer than that. Now, you can say 95% of my time is dedicated to vultures and vulture conservation.
Okay. Well, what's led that focus onto vultures in recent years, Andre?
Well, we did an analysis from an African perspective. There was a conference in Tanzania in Kenya first in 2012 and then 2013, where we brought together a large number and most of the prominent vulture researchers, conservationists, etc., together, and we brought them together in one room talking about the situation related to vultures in Africa at the time. And it was then decided to do a detailed analysis of vulture populations across the continent, which we proceeded then to publish in 2015 in a peer-reviewed paper in a fairly high-level journal called Conservation Letters. And that publication, within a very short span of time, based on the results that were reflected therein, resulted in the uplisting of most of Africa's vultures to either endangered or critically endangered status. In fact, at the time, there were 5 critically endangered species and 3 endangered species after the publication and after the uplisting. So it basically highlighted the substantial decline in vulture populations over 30 years prior to about 2015. That really caused, was a major cause for concern. And of course, linked to what we saw happen in South Asia in the 1990s with the massive decline of vultures there, the 2 largest concentrations of, at that stage, old world vultures that were facing severe pressure due to various threats. We realized that we needed to do more, and we realized that we needed to galvanize action to try and firstly halt the decline in populations, and then hopefully to start rebuilding. It's a massive undertaking, and my focus now is primarily to ensure and to promote that sort of work across Africa. And it stems from a process that we followed fairly high level through the Convention on Migratory Species, engaging with all 128 range states where old world vultures occur on the planet, in Africa, in Europe, and in Asia. And in 2016-17, the convention tasked a team of us to draft a vulture conservation plan for old world vultures across all three of those continents. And I was appointed as the team leader for that process. And within a period of about 14-15 months, with widespread consultation, workshops in each of the continents, and then a fourth workshop in the Middle East, we were able to put together a fairly comprehensive plan that was again submitted for review by the Scientific Council of the Convention. And that was then tabled at the Conference of the Parties for the Convention on Migratory Species in October 2017 in Manila in the Philippines. And yeah, it was for us. We were very excited when the plan was unanimously adopted by all the range states voted in favor of the plan being adopted and implemented. And that was 2017. And after the project, I then engaged again with the Endangered Wildlife Trust as my employer, and suggested that the primary focus of my work becomes the promotion, facilitation, and supporting of the implementation of this plan across Africa. And that's what I've been doing for the last 6 years. So it involves a lot of engagement at different levels, a lot of travel, very often to fairly remote parts of Africa, but also an opportunity to establish networks, facilitate capacity, work with people at ground level, and as I said, at different levels, but very often at ground level, in terms of developing capacity for monitoring, for research, for conservation of the birds, and to implement as many of the actions of that plan as possible.
Andre, what skills and personal qualities do you need to do what you do with vultures?
Almost an obsessive degree of dedication to the birds and their cause. And, it's fairly easy to develop that once you get to know the birds a bit better. The ability to sometimes just hang in there, persevere against the odds. Vultures are historically birds that don't really have a lot of good press. People don't necessarily consider them always in a positive light. We see ourselves as there to speak on behalf of these birds that, from an ecological perspective, probably some of the most essential species out there in terms of the ecological service that they provide, or the cleaning up of carcasses, the sanitary service that they provide, and so on. There simply is not another animal or a group of animals that can do that specific job that they do so well, as efficiently, as quickly as vultures can. And with the declines that we see, there are concerns that this ecological service is starting to break down in certain areas, and that certainly can have repercussions, within the wider environment, but also potentially to human health and to the health of the environment overall. And it's important for us to quantify that service firstly, and then to make other people aware of that, and to bring as many people as possible on side to work with us and to support what we are trying to do to conserve these ecologically important animals.
How did your own career develop?
I had an environmental awareness and was a naturalist probably for as long as I can remember. Always had an interest in the natural environment, and growing up on a continent like Africa, you're in a fortunate position that there's so much to get excited about. But birds themselves in particular caught my attention. And one of the reasons is, I grew up in a peri-urban small town sort of setup on the East Rand of South Africa. And I think nature, the closest that one managed to get to nature were birds. And birds are all around us. And that's what piqued my interest. And together with that, obviously, is the interest in wider conservation, working in Africa and living in Africa, where we have a wide range of wildlife that is of interest. There are large areas that are protected and so on. It was fairly natural that I would have how would you say, sort of move in that direction to consider conservation as a career choice. But obviously, back in the day in this country, all people like myself were obliged and were legally expected to go and do national service. So my career really started in the military, where I managed to obtain skills in training people, working with people, again, at all levels, large groups of people. It sort of forces you fairly early on in leadership positions, and sort of working under extreme pressure at times, and under difficult circumstances. So you learn an immense amount in those how would you say, late teens, early 20s, formative years. And but part of that was I had an opportunity, and I was placed, and I started working in the Kruger Lowveld area of South Africa, and together with, at that stage, I'd already started studying part-time in do conservation studies, and I evolved towards becoming a ranger myself, training other rangers in the Kruger National Park and elsewhere, and then managed protected areas. I was also moved to the high mountains of South Africa, where we have an isolated bearded vulture population, and the bird interest was also sort of rejuvenated at that time, and while managing protected areas, establishing it at that stage what's now part of the Golden Gate National Park, sort of almost starting a national park from scratch. It was incredibly valuable experience in my late 20s, and then realizing after a while that the interest in birds and bird conservation was getting more and more intense, and I had an opportunity then to work for BirdLife South Africa. I established their first site-based conservation project in South Africa at a place called Wakkerstroom in the Mpumalanga province. And while we were busy doing that, we also started training site-based bird guides, many of whom still operate and have established successful AV faunal businesses in South Africa, and are still active 20 plus years later. And I was approached in 2004 by the trust to oversee and manage the amalgamation of two of their programs, one focused on diurnal raptors and owls, and the other on vultures, and to sort of bring them together into one group. And at one stage, as part of that, managed more than 29 conservation projects across mostly South Africa, and then also some of them extended into Southern Africa. And then when the vulture work started taking off from about 2012, the focus almost naturally shifted towards vultures per se. And yeah, I've been incredibly fortunate, and I'm also thankful that my employer has allowed me to develop the position that I currently have over the last 19 years to the level where it currently is. So at the moment, I predominantly work outside of South Africa, and the work that I do at the moment, and we've established work with partners and projects in 17 African countries. And if you consider that there are 54 of those, we are not even a third of the way through doing what we need to do. So I really need to put a bit more energy into it before I keel over and start pushing up tulips.
Andre, do you need a degree to do what you do?
Yeah, I mean, I studied what in South African terms back in the day was called a national diploma, and then a higher diploma, which is basically an equivalent to a BSc honors degree. And since then, I've really worked in applied conservation, and I could have enrolled and done masters and PhDs, but my approach to things is I'm an applied conservationist. I don't want to be an academic. I don't want to just be a scientist. Yes, you can follow the academic path, and you can make a meaningful contribution. As I say, I work with many people that are PhDs, postdocs, etc., that are doing good work, but I don't think it's a prerequisite. If your passion lies within the applied conservation field, you can do a lot of work. The simple thing for me is you just need to get in there, and you need to get involved, and you need to make yourself available. You need to be able to sort of focus and be able to contribute.
You work for the Endangered Wildlife Trust, but you're also heavily involved with the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, the Species Survival Commission, Vulture Specialist Group. How does that work? What is that organization? How does that work for somebody who doesn't know, please?
Well, the Vulture Specialist Group is actually an organization. It's one of the specialist groups of, as you say, of the Species Survival Commission, which now has more than 110 specialist groups that either focus on individual species or groups of animals or plants, for that matter. And they, these groups tend to try and harness the knowledge and skills of individuals that work on those specific species, bring them together, and they form a think tank and a group of people with specialist knowledge and skills that you can then channel towards addressing certain specific issues. The specialist group basically consists of individuals. We focus there on recruiting and identifying individuals that are making a contribution towards vultures and vulture conservation, or can potentially, as early career individuals, can make a contribution, and to bring them on board, and for the experienced individuals and the early career individuals to sort of share and exchange knowledge and expertise, and hopefully to establish a continuity in terms of future generations of conservationists, in our case, particularly focused on vultures. So the group came about in 2012. It was concurrent with the conference we had in Africa, the first Pan-African Vulture Summit. And I approached the IUCN SSC with the idea of establishing a specialist group, having learned of the SSC overall. They were quite favorable of the idea. We then went through a process, identified an additional person to co-chair with me, who is Chris Bowden, based in India, working with the Asian vulture crisis. And we've been co-chairs since the establishment in 2012 for 11 years now. Probably time for us to, at the next cycle, to step back and to let one of the younger leaders take the reins and run with it. But because we sort of focus more on specialist individuals, the membership is not huge. We have a membership of about 130 individuals from across the planet. But what this enables them to do is to communicate directly with each other, engage, consult each other about issues and challenges that they might face, and learn from each other in that process. So, it's been a very positive process for me to be involved in it, to see how this evolves, and also very often to see some of those very early career individuals that became part of the group early on, now 12, 15 years later, making their mark in the world of vulture conservation, and also starting to in some aspects take the lead. So it's encouraging to see that, and again, networks are critical in what we do, and learning from each other is a vital part of what we do. Without having to reinvent the wheel all the time, it saves a lot of time and effort.
Andre, for early career individuals who want to read more, doesn't the IUCN have a page on its website with all the literature and all the reports relevant to that particular group?
Yeah, look, the Vulture Specialist Group does have its own webpage, and each of the other specialist groups. So if somebody is interested in vultures, they can simply just on the internet search engine, just enter Vulture Specialist Group IUCN, and you will get to the page. And there's information. We have a 6-monthly newsletter that is sent to about 600 recipients at the moment, that has a very appreciative readership, and that keeps people current. And then we also have a peer-reviewed journal called Vulture News, where people can submit written articles to for peer review, and it can be published. But its focus is expanded many years ago to global, and that also appears once every 6 months or so. And every now and then, if there's a specific issue that we want to focus on, we do a special edition of that journal. We are currently also involved in a separate process to look at the extent to which this multi-species action plan has been implemented across the range. And part of that process is to look at the number of papers that have been published focused on old world vultures since the adoption of the plan. Also, with the dawning of satellite tracking, etc., the ability to do that over the last 10, 12 years, We've learned immense amounts, but there's so much more that we need to learn and that we have to learn to try and enable us and give us the knowledge to conserve vultures even better.
Andre, in your job, do you have to handle vultures? And if so, what is the context? Are you involved with captive breeding projects or rehabilitation or just field biology? How does it work, please?
My primary focus, other than the higher level work and the planning, in what I do a lot of skills development of people on the ground. So you train people in basic monitoring of vultures and vulture populations, looking at monitoring breeding biology and breeding success of populations. My focus is primarily more hands-on with the birds in the field. I'm not an ex-situ or a captive person, although those components and rehabilitation in particular, all of those have a very important role to play. We need people with multiple skill sets, and but my focus has been primarily in the field conservation. So my hands-on experience with birds is really that, is in terms of tracking studies, etc., is to catch birds, to fit and to harness birds with tracking technology. I've just done a talk that I need to do tomorrow locally, and in the last 3 years, we've trapped and harnessed more than 200 vultures of 6 different species in Africa at various locations in 7 African countries. So that's my how can I say that? That's my bonus check. I get to spend a lot of time in amazing places, looking and learning of vultures from vultures directly. Is to spend a lot of time observing them, and then also having them in hand. And when once you have these animals close up, and you see how amazing they are, they've been designed to do the fantastic job they do, to be as mobile as they are, in being able to cover hundreds of kilometers in a day through flight, and so on. They are just magnificent, and they do take your breath away. And for me, I don't think I'll ever tire of that. Just sitting at a feeding event and just seeing what the birds do, how they interact with each other, how dedicated the parents are generally to raise that single chick in the case of old world vultures. They simply are amazing, and their biology, as with many other birds, is simply fascinating.
Andre, for somebody watching this who feels totally inspired, who wants to become a raptor biologist, who wants to go on to work with vultures, what advice can you offer them, please?
Well, I think it's just to start, and I think the younger you start, just developing an interest, if you do have an interest, is what I did as a kid. And yeah, I think it's a different situation now. I mean, I devoured whatever literature I could lay my hands on about the natural environment. I think I was a naturalist first, and then you start specializing in certain areas, and you develop certain interests. Is to just start doing that. Is to have an interest. My advice to a generation now that's still at school and probably in their 20s is my advice would be is just lift your eyes away from your cell phone screen and look at the fantastic world around you. Put the phone away and go out there and experience it and enjoy it. And I can guarantee you that if you go to the right places and the right environments, you'll fall in love with it, and you'll want to do something to make sure that those do stay intact, because all of it's under pressure. And then if you really have that profound interest, it's always a good idea to try and get yourself academically trained, but also important to get hands-on, is get hands-on experience while you are doing that. Take the opportunities. And I know in many parts of the world, volunteering to do such work is where many people get that opportunity. And I cannot encourage people more to try and do that in their own environment. Is often people have this vision of looking beyond and doing things elsewhere, but sometimes we need to just start sweeping in front of our own back door and start making the difference there until you are in a position to spread your wings and do it elsewhere. But it's to start doing it. It's as simple as that, one foot in front of the other. Starting is better than waiting and wondering whether you should. And before you know it, you're 80 years old, and all the maybes and the buts and so on comes to nothing. In terms of conservation, we need people to do something now, to get out there and to do something meaningful. And we need as many people that think that way and that want to contribute constructively as we can to try and do what needs to be done, not just for vultures, but for the environment as a whole. And also, ultimately, if we do that for the environment, it also benefits humanity.
Andre, can you suggest a research topic for an undergraduate thesis on vultures?
Go and see what you can find out and look at where the gaps are. Don't try and duplicate on work that is already ongoing or that has been done quite extensively. Is look for gaps and then go and address that. And I think one of the important areas that we are looking at, and there's a lot of work happening on that at the moment, but it's really trying to substantially quantify the ecological service that vultures provide to the environment as a whole.
Andre, you are the manager for the Vultures for Africa program of the Endangered Wildlife Trust. Thank you so much for being on the Practical Animal channel, Andre Botha.
Pleasure. Yeah, we didn't really talk much about the birds themselves, which is a pity. Maybe we should do that on a future occasion.
I'll come in.